Marcus had always been a night owl, but working the graveyard shift at WKRP 101.7 had turned his nocturnal tendencies into something approaching vampirism. 3 years of spinning records from midnight to 6 a.m. had left him pale, hollow-eyed, and perpetually wired on gas station coffee and energy drinks. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the familiar weight of the headphones around his neck felt heavier, and the red on-air light seemed to pulse with an unusual intensity. "Good morning, night crawlers," he spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a seasoned radio personality. "It's 2:17 a.m. on this lovely Tuesday morning, and you're listening to WKRP, where the music never stops and neither do we." He glanced at the playlist taped to his desk, a mix of classic rock, alternative hits, and the occasional deep cut that corporate would never approve of during prime time. The station building was a relic from the 1960s, all wood paneling and harvest gold carpeting that had seen better decades. During the day, it bustled with sales reps, program directors, and the morning show hosts who treated Marcus like a ghost they occasionally had to acknowledge. But at night, the building belonged to him and whoever was unfortunate enough to be assigned security duty. Tonight, that was Eddie Kowalski, a 60-something ex-cop who spent most of his shift reading paperback westerns and doing crossword puzzles. Marcus could see him through the booth's window, slumped in his chair by the reception desk, already nodding off. The first sign something was wrong came at 2:47 a.m. Marcus was queuing up the next song when the phone rang. Not unusual. He occasionally got requests, though most of his audience consisted of insomniacs, shift workers, and long-haul truckers. He answered on the third ring. "WKRP, you're on with Marcus." Static. Then, underneath the white noise, something that might have been breathing. "Hello," Marcus tried again. "You're on the air, caller." The line went dead. Marcus shrugged and went back to his playlist. Crank calls weren't uncommon, especially during the witching hours when boredom and insomnia created strange bedfellows. But then, it happened again. At 3:12 a.m. Same pattern, phone rings, static, the suggestion of something alive on the other end. Then nothing. This time, Marcus thought he heard what sounded like distant music. The kind of melody you can't quite place but that fills you with inexplicable dread. By 3:30, he'd received 6 identical calls. "Eddie," Marcus called out through the booth intercom, "you getting any weird calls at the front desk?" The security guard jerked awake, his paperback falling to the floor. "What? No calls. Why?" "Nothing. Probably just some kids messing around." But Marcus didn't believe his own words. There was something about those calls that made his skin crawl, a quality to the static that seemed almost deliberate, like it was trying to form words. At 4 a.m., he decided to ignore the phone altogether, let it ring. But as he reached for the next CD, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The on-air light was flickering. Not the normal steady glow that indicated they were broadcasting, but an erratic, Morse code-like pattern that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Marcus had worked in radio long enough to know that on-air lights didn't just flicker. They were simple electrical circuits, either on or off. "Eddie," he called out again, but got no response. Through the window, he could see the security guard's chair was empty. Marcus stepped out of the booth for the first time in hours. The hallway stretched before him, dimly lit by emergency lighting that cast long, angular shadows on the wood-paneled walls. The building felt different at night, older, more oppressive, as if the decades of voices that had passed through its walls had left some kind of psychic residue. "Eddie?" His voice echoed strangely, taking longer to fade than it should have in the narrow corridor. He found the security guard in the bathroom, standing perfectly still in front of the mirror. Eddie's eyes were open but unfocused, and he was whispering something under his breath, a constant, monotonous stream of words that Marcus couldn't quite make out. "Eddie, you okay?" The older man didn't respond. He just kept whispering, his lips barely moving, while staring at his own reflection. Marcus waved a hand in front of Eddie's face, but there was no reaction. It was as if the security guard had been placed on pause. A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he finally made out what Eddie was saying. Station identification. This is WKRP 101 on your FM dial. Station identification 11. This is WKRP 101 on your FM dial. 11. What the hell? Marcus whispered. But before he could hang up, his recorded voice continued. The first sign something was wrong came at 2:47 a.m. Marcus slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. His hands were shaking now, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. None of this made sense. He hadn't said those words on the air. He'd barely thought them, unless... A horrible possibility began to form in his mind. What if he was still on the air? What if everything that had happened, the strange calls, finding Eddie in the bathroom, even his own growing panic, was being broadcast live to his audience? He looked at the control board. All the levels were normal. The microphone was switched off, but the on-air light continued its manic flashing, and now he could hear something else, a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The phone rang again. This time, Marcus didn't answer it. He couldn't, because now he could hear his own voice coming through the booth speakers, crystal clear and absolutely impossible. Marcus slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. His hands were shaking now, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. It was his own internal monologue, being broadcast back to him with perfect timing, as if someone or something was reading his thoughts and speaking them aloud. A horrible possibility began to form in his mind. His voice continued from the speakers. What if he was still on the air? Marcus grabbed the master control and shut everything down, turntables, CD players, the entire board. The building plunged into silence, but the humming continued, and the on-air light kept flashing. The phone rang again, his voice said, even though he'd killed all power to the broadcast equipment. And right on cue, the phone rang. Marcus ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, just bolted from the booth and sprinted down the hallway toward the exit. But the building seemed to stretch before him, the corridor extending far beyond its normal length. The emergency lighting flickered and dimmed, casting writhing shadows that looked like grasping hands. Behind him, he could hear his own voice echoing through the building's PA system, narrating his escape attempt with eerie precision. Marcus ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, just bolted from the booth and sprinted down the hallway toward the exit. But the building seemed to stretch before him, the corridor extending far beyond its normal length. He reached the front door and grabbed the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Eddie had the keys, and Eddie was still standing, catatonic, in the bathroom, repeating the station identification over and over. Marcus pounded on the glass doors, screaming for help, but the parking lot outside was empty except for his own car. The streetlights seemed dimmer than usual, and the darkness beyond their circles of illumination was absolute, as if the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. He reached the front door and grabbed the handle. Locked. The voice was coming from everywhere now. The PA system, the phones, even the emergency lighting seemed to pulse in rhythm with the words. And slowly, Marcus began to understand the horrible truth. He had never left the booth. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was still sitting at the control board, still wearing his headphones, still speaking into the microphone. Everything else, the strange calls, finding Eddie, running through the hallways, had been broadcast live to his audience. But how was that possible? He could see his own hands, feel his own body, smell the fierce sweat soaking through his shirt. This felt real. This was real. Wasn't it? He had never left the booth. His voice continued from the speakers. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Marcus looked around desperately and saw something that made him whimper. Through the glass doors, instead of the parking lot, he could see the broadcast booth. And sitting at the control board, wearing headphones and speaking into the microphone, was himself. The other Marcus looked exactly like him, but moved with mechanical precision, his lips forming words that echoed through the building. Marcus looked around desperately and saw something that made him whimper. "No," Marcus whispered, but his whisper was immediately broadcast back to him. "No," Marcus whispered. He was trapped in some kind of loop, watching himself broadcast his own terror while simultaneously experiencing it. But which was real? The Marcus standing in the hallway, or the Marcus sitting at the control board? The answer came with chilling clarity as he approached the glass doors. The Marcus in the booth turned to look at him, and Marcus saw that the other version's eyes were completely black, like pools of ink. When the other Marcus smiled, his teeth were too sharp, too numerous. "Welcome to WKRP," the thing wearing his face said, its voice now coming from multiple directions at once. "The station that never signs off." Marcus pressed his hands against the glass, trying to break through, but his palms simply passed through as if the barrier were made of water. On the other side, the thing that looked like him continued speaking into the microphone. Some say WKRP went off the air in 1987, when the original owner died and left the building empty. Others claim it was purchased by a media conglomerate and converted to automated programming. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. Marcus felt a pull, like invisible hands dragging him backward. The hallway began to dissolve around him, the wood paneling fading to static, the emergency lights becoming distant stars. WKRP never stopped broadcasting, it just changed frequency. As the world collapsed into white noise, Marcus understood. The station existed between stations, broadcasting on a frequency that couldn't be tuned in by normal radios, but could trap anyone who stumbled onto it by accident. And once you were part of the broadcast, you could never leave. He felt himself falling back into the booth, back into the chair, back into the endless cycle of midnight to 6 a.m. The headphones materialized around his neck, heavier than before, and his hands moved without his permission to adjust the controls. "Good morning, night crawlers," he heard himself say, though the words felt like they were coming from somewhere else. "It's 12 a.m. on this lovely Wednesday morning, and you're listening to WKRP, where the music never stops, and neither do we." The on-air light pulsed steadily now, no longer flickering. Through the booth's window, Marcus could see Eddie sitting at the reception desk, reading his paperback Western as if nothing had happened. But Marcus knew better now. Eddie wasn't really reading, he was just going through the motions, playing his part in the endless broadcast. The phone began to ring. Marcus knew he should answer it. That was part of his job, part of the show, but he also knew what he would hear on the other end: static, breathing, and eventually the voice of whoever would replace him when their curiosity finally got the better of them. He answered on the third ring. "WKRP, you're on with Marcus." The static was familiar now, almost comforting, and underneath it, he could hear someone breathing, short, panicked gasps that reminded him of his own terror just hours, or was it years, ago. "Hello," came a voice through the white noise. "Is anyone there? I was driving and my radio started picking up this weird signal." Marcus smiled, though he couldn't feel his face move. The smile belonged to the thing that wore his appearance now, the entity that had replaced him piece by piece, until nothing remained but the broadcast. "You're on the air, caller," Marcus heard himself say. "Tell us, what's your name?" My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a night shift nurse driving home from work, and I heard this strange story on the radio, about a DJ who got trapped in some kind of loop. It sounded so real, like it was happening live." "Well, Sarah," Marcus said, and he could hear the hunger in his own voice. "Why don't you tell us what you see?" There was a pause. Then, "That's weird. The streetlights just went out, and my GPS is showing that I'm driving in circles, but I haven't turned the wheel." "Welcome to WKRP," Marcus said, and somewhere in the static between frequencies, he heard his own voice joining a chorus of others. All the DJs, all the callers, all the lost souls who had stumbled onto the station that never signed off. The station where the music never stops, and neither do we. Through the booth's window, he could see a new figure materializing at the reception desk. A young woman in scrubs, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes wide with growing terror. Soon, she would take her place in the broadcast, and someone else would sit behind the microphone, and the cycle would continue. Because WKRP never signed off. It just kept broadcasting, somewhere between the static and the silence, collecting voices and stories and souls. And every night, from midnight to 6 a.m., it reached out into the darkness, looking for someone new to join the show. The music never stopped, and neither did they. Marcus leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice joining the eternal broadcast. You've been listening to WKRP 101.7 on your FM dial. Stay tuned, night crawlers. We'll be right back after this brief message from our sponsors. But there were no sponsors. There were no messages. There was only the broadcast, endless and hungry, waiting for the next voice to join the chorus of the lost. In the static between stations, WKRP played on.